Have you been told you need to stop doing what you love, whether it's exercise, running, or a sport? Well, here at Dynamic, we don't like that answer. In this podcast, we'll talk to leaders in the health and wellness space from Southwest Florida to get the solutions you need to get you back to doing what you love. Welcome to the Dynamic Naples Podcast. Hey, what's going on? Dr. Chris here. I'm diving deeper into the functional medicine world today and talking about B12 deficiency and folate deficiency. So let's just start off with talking about some of the functions of B12. There are a lot of functions in folate because they do work together to make red blood cells. They're also responsible for the myelin that's around nerves. So nerves have a insulator that's made of fat. That's the myelin sheath. So it not only protects the nerves, but it also makes the nerve signal move faster. B12 and homocysteine are part of the methylation cycle. If you've heard of the methylation cycle, very important. It's a biochemical process that has several important functions, including gene expression, DNA and RNA synthesis, detoxification, neurotransmitter production, and has a role in cellular energy, just to name a few. Also, some evidence has shown that B12 may have a role in nitric oxide production. Nitric oxide is a very powerful vasodilator. Okay, so you've probably heard of B12 deficiency. It's a very common problem. Estimates around 40% of people between the ages of 25 and 83 have a B12 deficiency. Some of the problems that we blame on quote-unquote normal aging is really just B12 deficiency. And unfortunately, it's not really commonly tested. And when it is, it measures serum B12, which is typically the inactive part of B12, and that could be off. So even though your B12 shows normal, you have to look at the other markers such as homocysteine to verify if you are low. Also, the lab ranges are probably too low. 211 is the bottom of the end of the lab range. You can be in stage 1 of B12 deficiency and start having symptoms between 200 and 350. So the lab range is probably on the low side. And there are other countries that set the limit higher, around the 450 mark, such as Japan, and they have lower incidence of cognitive decline. So some markers that we want to look at to check your B12 status are MMA, which is methylmalonic acid, HOLO-TC, which is probably the most sensitive one, but that one unfortunately is not measured much in the United States, and homocysteine, and there's another one called FIGLU, which I'll probably get into later. So what causes B12 deficiency? Well, first you got inadequate intake. So that's going to be those that are on a vegetarian or vegan diet. Intestinal malabsorption, so low stomach acid could cause that. Pernicious anemia, which is it's an autoimmune condition that attacks the parietal cells in the stomach. You have atrophic gastritis, which can be caused by H. pylori. Pancreatic enzyme insufficiency, and alcoholism, because that will also inhibit B12 absorption. So touching on the vegetarian vegan diet, I pass no judgment here. You can choose to eat what you want, but you kind of have to supplement if you're on a vegetarian diet, because you may have heard that you can get B12 from sources such as seaweed, fermented soy, spirulina, and brewer's yeast, but they really contain cobamides, which is a B12 analog. And they will actually inhibit B12 absorption. So you can't get it from those plants, unfortunately. Plants don't need B12, so they just don't store it. Okay, also PPI use. I want to go over that. So that's proton pump inhibitors, antacids, anything that inhibits the acid in the stomach. Probably not a good idea. Those were originally cleared to be used for 2 weeks only. And then the FDA decided to make them over the counter. So when you make something over the counter, people sort of assume it's safe. So a lot of people will just, swallow those things like candy. And that will not only inhibit B12 absorption, but it'll inhibit a lot of things and can cause something called SIBO, which I'll probably be doing a podcast on. That's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So some of the symptoms of B12 deficiency include weakness, fatigue, swollen tongue, difficulty thinking or reasoning, so some of that brain fog. Numbness and tingling in the hands and feet, that's a common one that I see. Difficulty walking or imbalance, anemia, jaundice, and memory loss. I will dive a little bit more into anemia because originally I kind of just thought that iron deficiency causes anemia, which it does, but I didn't realize that B12 does as well. I just want to touch on the stages of B12 deficiency. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, stage 1, you could be in stage 1 and test lab normal. Once you're in stage 3, that's when your homocysteine has elevated, and then also your MMA, your urinary methylmalonic acid, will elevate too. So those are inverse markers because B12 combines with those things in the methylation cycle. So if there's an abundance of, say, homocysteine, that means B12 is not being used for the methylation cycle. So once it reaches stage 4 deficiency, you can actually develop megaloblastic or macrocytic anemia, which at that point becomes irreversible. So super important to catch this before that happens. Okay, let's go over some foods that are high in B12. So in order, clams by far the highest, lamb liver, beef liver, duck liver, oysters, pork liver, caviar, mackerel, herring, mussels, crab, sardines, and salmon. So you can see one of the problems here already. I mean, how many people do you know that eat organ meats? I know tons of people that don't like seafood at all. And especially things like clams and oysters. They are powerhouses of nutrients, but a lot of people just don't like them. So what do you do about this? How can you increase absorption of B12? Well, one thing you can do is take betaine HCl tablets, that's hydrochloric acid. Do that under the guidance with a practitioner. That's only for someone who has low stomach acid. Cranberry juice can increase absorption. You can also increase your calcium-rich foods, so dairy and cheeses, if tolerated, and then address any GI issues that may be leading to any kind of malabsorption. Some things that decrease absorption, like I already talked about, alcohol and PPIs. Metformin also can inhibit absorption of it. I'll be interested to see any studies coming out on semaglutide, the one that everyone's doing now. I wonder if that is causing B12 deficiency as well. Okay, so now folate. So I think I mentioned earlier, it's part of the methylation cycle, and it's important for blood cell formation. One of the most common causes of folate deficiency is nutritional, but there's also the genetic polymorphism, the MTHFR, that gene, you know what everyone calls it, the motherfucker gene. Excuse my language. MTHFR homozygotes have a 70 to 75% loss of enzyme activity. But with a nutrient-rich diet and no other significant mutations, there can be enough enzymatic activity to avoid deficiency without supplementing. Compound heterozygotes, so this is if you have just one copy, for C677T and A1298C, they can lose up to 50% of their enzyme activity. So, yeah, also common to have folate deficiency, but I should also mention here, don't take folic acid. Folic acid is not the same thing. That's a synthetic, and there's an enzyme that's required to break it down in the human body, and that's actually has very low activity in humans. So it can accumulate and cause some damage, damage as bad as cancer. There are other options like 5-MTHF or folinic acid. So folic acid and folinic acid are different, and folinic acid is a better choice. Again, see a practitioner about that. Okay, I did mention fig glue earlier, so that's formimino-glutamate. That's fig glue. It can be used to differentiate between B12 and folate deficiency when homocysteine is elevated. So a high urine fig glue indicates folate deficiency. Yes, so fig glue is a urinary test, not a blood test. Okay, so let's dive into some of my blood work. Now, I don't have all these markers on the test I did, but I did have B12. My B12 was 655, so that was kind of right in the middle. However, my homocysteine was elevated, just outside of the lab range. It was normal in the lab range, but it was functionally high. It was at 14. So that could be inflammation. But then you look at your CRP. My CRP, that's indicative of inflammation as well, and my CRP was normal. So homocysteine can also rise in response to decreased hormone production, such as thyroid hormone. So I did look at my TSH, and again, that was lab normal but functionally high. So that's what I think was going on. My TSH is a little elevated, sort of pointing towards development of hypothyroidism, and I think that was raising my homocysteine. So once again, this is why I love the functional medicine approach. Because I can see that, I'm quote unquote normal right now, but I think I'm trending towards hypothyroidism, and through some diet changes, I could reverse that. Also, my RBC and hemoglobin were high, so it doesn't look like anemia. It could be due to some iron overload, which I talked about in the last podcast, or even just dehydration. Okay, so there you have it. B12 folate, very important and very commonly deficient. So get it tested. Don't just take random supplements. Find out what your markers tell you. And that's all I have for you this week. Thanks. Why guess when you can test? Do you get hangry or crash after a carb-heavy meal? These could be indicators that there is a dysfunction in your blood glucose regulation. If left unchecked, it can lead to irreversible changes. If you catch it quick enough, you can make diet and lifestyle changes that will get your levels where they need to be. 88% of Americans are pre-diabetic and don't know it. Diabetes underpins many of the pathologies we deal with in this country, such as obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, and stroke. For some reason, it is rarely screened with your physician, and if they do test for blood glucose, it's usually with an A1C or a fasting glucose, which can sometimes give you a false negative. Nutrisense is a company that supplies continuous glucose monitors. We've paired with Nutrisense to get you real-time data to see how your physiology responds to glucose. The Nutrisense app lets you track your daily activity to see how food, sleep, exercise, and stress impact your glucose. You can log or import this data into the Nutrisense app to see the effect on your blood glucose levels as soon as it happens. Use the code DrChris25 for $25 off your order today. Do you have unexplained pain, or do you wonder just how healthy you are? When was the last time you had your blood tested? Blood chemistry analysis is a great tool to stay ahead of any health conditions, and now you can have control of your health with Let's Get Checked. Let's Get Checked is an incredible company that sends blood tests to your home. You can choose from over 30 different tests, whether that's thyroid function, testosterone, micronutrient, cholesterol, or C-reactive protein, which is a marker for inflammation. It is sent to you with free shipping, and you get results in 2 to 5 days. No physician referral needed. Use the code DPT25 for 25% off. You can find links in the show notes. Did you know that you can get started with physical therapy without a physician's referral? Physical therapists don't just solve pain, we get down to the root cause and keep it from coming back. We also discuss all things health, such as nutrition and lifestyle changes. If you feel that you could use some help, let's get on a free consult call. Go to www.dynamicnaples.com and sign up for a free call. Also, if you like this podcast, please give us a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us spread the message. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.